The rest of this current realities is in regard to the fiscal or the legal issues that accompany fiscal emergency. When Little Miami went into fiscal emergency in July of 2010, the state established a fiscal, what do they call it, a financial planning and supervision commission. This is 5 voting members. One is a representative from the Auditor of State, one is a representative from, in place of the state superintendent. So those 2 folks are actual employees of the state of Ohio. And then we also have 3 local residents who fill out the rest of the 5 membership. And those people apply to and are selected from those applications. So in the first 120 days that they are in power, they have to come up with a fiscal emergency plan for getting us out of our situation. So the end of that 120 days was somewhere in late November, early December. And what they recommended in that plan was to put a levy on the ballot. The Little Miami School Board had already put a levy on the ballot. It was already scheduled to be voted on in November. So that job was already done. Essentially what they did was endorse our plan. And then of course when the levy failed, they had to amend that plan, and that currently stands to put yet another levy on the ballot in May. So they have some other duties as well. They have to make sure that our financial reporting is up to snuff. We have no problems with that, so that's not been something that they've focused on. One of the key issues is that they have to produce a five-year forecast that shows us operating in the black at the end of 5 years, that we show positive cash flow. So when they're talking about what to put on the ballot, it's very important that it include enough millage to show a positive cash flow at the end of 5 years. Okay, so I already said that we're going to put another levy on the ballot in May, so that's their next plan. So far, in essence, what they've done so far is to make sure that we've got a levy on the ballot, which we have done before. This shows our levy activities for the last couple of years. We've had a total of 7 issues on the ballot, all of which have failed. When the Little Miami School Board discusses what to put on the ballot, we have incorporated what we would like to do for educational programming, what our financial constraints are, and we've also tried to listen to the community to incorporate what they're telling us, what they say that they will support. So it kind of looks like we've been all over the map, but it has been in response to the levies before. So we've had traditional property taxes, we've had incrementals, we've had earnings taxes and traditional income taxes. Unfortunately, none of these have passed, so we are still working at that. I think it's important to remember that the downturn of the economy has definitely affected the outcomes of levies across the state, so that certainly hasn't helped our situation. And then, with a lot of state and national elections going on at the same time, we have levies on the ballot. There's a lot of anti-tax sentiment out there. I think, we just went through one of these back in November. And so it's just not an easy time to be on the ballot. I think a lot of our neighboring districts actually have tried to push off putting issues on the ballot as to wait for things to get better. And unfortunately, Little Miami just didn't have the luxury of time, so we had to just go for it. Okay, how do you get out of fiscal emergency? Basically, there are 2 ways. You can reduce spending and you can pass a levy. That's it. So we've already told you about all the spending cuts we've made, and with the additional cuts that we're going to have to implement for the next school year, we will be operating at or below state minimums across the board. That's it. there's no more reductions after we implement these this new wave of them for the next school year. So that's one way, and we've done our job there. So the only exit strategy left for us is, again, to pass a levy. I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but it's pass a levy, folks. So another thing that we have to do to exit fiscal emergency is to make sure that whatever the conditions were to get you there in the first place are eliminated. So, you know, if you don't pass a levy big enough to carry you through for some period of time, it stands to reason that you're going to be returning to fiscal emergency or some level of fiscal caution or watch very soon after, unless you plan ahead, are proactive, and you try to pass something that's going to get you where you need to be. And again, the most important thing is at the end of that 5-year forecast that we see positive operating cash flow. Again, we have no precedent where we have a district who has not been able to pass a levy before they run out of money. So this is something new for the state to have to deal with. One of the things that seems to be missing from the law is, as we went through what the criteria are for fiscal caution and watch and emergency, there's very specific criteria for what puts a district into that category. But then there's this black hole, and there's nothing to address a district that never passes a levy. And indeed, the state has not had to deal with this yet. They've always had their districts eventually manage to pass a levy. And we hope that that happens for us too, but there's a distinct possibility that it might not. And we have a shorter time span, so we have to talk about that today. There are some legal frameworks in the law that addresses what could happen, and we're going to talk about this in much more detail in a minute, so I'm just going to pass over them very quickly. It is, again, pass a levy, possible dissolution, change the law that would allow us to keep moving, and transfer of property. Now, an important part of fiscal emergency for us is to be able to borrow loans from the state. The state budgets and puts into a fund called the Solvency Assistance Fund money that can be used for districts in fiscal emergency. For the past couple of biennial budgets, the state has allotted $18 million a year for use in this fund. They're currently projecting flat funding of $18 million for the next biennium as well. Now, Little Miami just got $5 million out of that $18 million pot. If you go back and think about that last map showing 1/3 of the school districts in Ohio heading for fiscal issues, you kind of wonder if that $18 million pot is going to be enough. And let me clarify for a minute here, because when you're in fiscal emergency, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting loans for every year that you're in emergency. So it's not, you know, every district in fiscal emergency isn't taking out of that pot every year, but it still looks like it might be a little low. That's just a possibility. Also, about these loans, once we get them, we have to repay them within 2 years. So we got $5 million this year. Next year, they will just subtract that from our state foundation. An important piece to this is we are limited in the amount of money that we can borrow from the state by what we receive from the state. So Little Miami, for example, I'm sorry, let me catch up with myself here. Yes, this advance is basically, it's an advance on your paycheck. So we get a certain amount of money every year from the state foundation money. We get about 30% of our revenue from the state. It equals about $10 million. Other districts get 40%, 50%, up to 75% of state revenue, or money for their districts from the state. So our loan capacity is determined by how much we receive from the state, and we're not going to be able to exceed that. And that's really the critical piece here, is because we are on the low end of state funding, our capacity to borrow money is going to limit how long we can be in fiscal emergency. It's, I think Kim said that we have the possibility of running out of funding in the next school year, the 2011-12 school year. And that's because we will have capped out our loan capacity. It's kind of like going to a check and loan. You know, you're borrowing money and you're paying back money at the same time. It's odd. This chart shows all of the districts that are currently in fiscal emergency, starting with East Cleveland. They've been in it the longest, over 7 years. It's 92 months. And all the way down, we're second from the bottom, 6 months in. And there's a new district in that just followed us. In the fourth column, it shows how much of the revenue comes from the state for that particular district. So again, East Cleveland, Youngstown, the next one down, it's southeastern Ohio. They're in the close to 70% mark, as opposed to Little Miami, again, at 30%. So that extends their window of fiscal emergency quite a bit longer than ours. Okay, back to the agenda, just to show you that we are moving along here. We're going to take what we know so far about how we got here, what we know about the laws, and we're going to talk a little bit about the options as we see them provided in law as it is written right now. The number one scenario is pass an operating levy. Surprise. And this first scenario is actually the one that the state would like us to put on the ballot in May. Back in their December meeting, they suggested, or they asked us to put on a 13.95 mill levy. And in addition to that, they asked us to implement further budget reductions that will total a little over $1 million. This will get us down to the state minimums. They include, again, reducing our graduation requirements down to 20 credits from our current 24. We cut some more services with county offices. We reduce further staffing, some administrative, more teachers. We close another building, and that will get us another $1.2 million in savings. This does not restore anything for the foreseeable future in any of the educational program at all for the next 5 years. It does give us the opportunity to get into that positive cash flow at the end of 5 years. It was about $1.7 million. So what that means for Little Miami is about 2 payrolls. So what we see as potential issues with this one is it doesn't meet up with our core values of preparing our students and making sure that they have opportunities. It does not include in the forecast a very important thing that has been happening since we've made these reduction cuts, and some of our neighboring districts are quite aware of this phenomenon. But for the neighboring districts that have open enrollment, our students can choose to go to those neighboring districts for education. You know, as long as they can get themselves there, they can go there. Now, if we have a Little Miami student sit in a Little Miami classroom, what that equates to in terms of state funding for that child is in round numbers, around $2,400, $2,500. I think it's actually a little bit less. When that same student walks into a neighboring district, our district has to pay that district $5,700. So we've seen quite a number, into the hundreds, of our children going to those other districts concerned about the level of education that they can get at Little Miami. So they're exercising their options, folks, and they're walking to those other districts. This year alone, we have seen a decrease. We've had to pay out over $2 million to other districts for our students. So, you know, we're already in a pickle financially, and this just isn't helping. It's legal, it's the law, it's what happens. So back to the 13.95, the problem that we see coming is that because we've implemented, or we're going to have to implement, further cuts, we're going to see more children leaving the district, and any savings that we see with this scenario will be lost with the kids walking out the door. The other issue is that the 5-year forecast built in state reductions for the next couple of years. The state works on a biennium budget, and they're telling school districts to kind of plan in the 20% range of a reduction. It's not for sure yet. Could be more, could be less, but they're guesstimating it'll be about 20%. And that was built into that scenario. But every 2 years, that budget changes, and it has could go up or go down in terms of what we'll receive from the state. But for the last, at least 2 that I can remember, plus this one coming up, we've received less state funding. And knowing, we've heard it on the news almost every day, that Ohio has an $8 billion hole to fill, we're thinking that the chances are that this trend is going to continue, that the state is just not going to have the money to increase the funding or even maybe flatline it. It looks like we could very well be seeing more state reductions in funding. So at the end of that 13.95 mil levy, if you haven't included those assumptions into it, we think that this is not going to fill the requirements to get us out of fiscal emergency. We've put together a timeline to kind of show what we're talking about here. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to see in a picture. We start out at the far end in the green. We're in January. The little diamond with the 8 on is the 8th levy. That will be in May. If we pass it, we move forward. If not, we've got the other opportunity in November. That's the number 9. And then there is a possibility that this could work for us. If things just go really well, there is that possibility that we could eke ourselves out of fiscal emergency. Again, not putting anything back. The only way that would happen is if we put another levy on the ballot sometime in that time frame there. So we've ended this in the red range with a big question mark because we just don't know how this would end up for us. Second scenario, pass a levy. This is actually the one that we would really like to see happen. And what we're saying is it will be something more than 13.95. The Little Miami School Board still needs to discuss this, but in our estimation, this is the only possibility that will realistically get us out of fiscal emergency and not send us right back in at the end of 5 years. Again, don't know what that number is, but our hope would be it would be enough to pay back the loans that we owe the state, start to restore some of the programs that we've lost, and give us some hope of some financial security for the future. And again, I'm going to show this on, again, two opportunities, May and November, and our timeline. And I'd like to say it's a rosy picture, but we don't want rosy in this case. It's just all green, and that's the way we want it to look. So we have 2 opportunities to pass it, and then that arrow extends beyond 2012, still showing green, still showing the possibility of financial stability. And scenario number 3, dissolution, which is probably why many of you here came today. There's been a lot of talk about it in the newspaper, in radio, wherever you turn. It seems like we're the topic of conversation. What this is based on is a law in the Ohio Revised Code. It's 33/1129. And what I'm going to do is read it to you. I'm sorry for that. And I'm going to show you some of the pertinent parts we'll highlight. But what it says is that no school district shall exist which does not maintain within its borders grades K through 12, and such existing school district not maintaining these buildings shall be dissolved. and its territory joined with other school district or districts by order of the State Board of Education. If no agreement is made among the surrounding districts, this order will provide an equitable distribution of all the funding, all the debts, all the assets among the surrounding districts, and that will be by the order of the state. So that's what a lot of us are here to talk about today. So we're going to spend a little time talking about this. Initially, first of all, there's not precedent for this. As I've mentioned before, there has not been a school district who has been in fiscal emergency and not been able to pass a levy before they've run out of money. Since our window of opportunity is so compressed, we have to talk about this now. We have 2 levy opportunities, and then it's over. The state has to figure out what to do with us. Indeed, there's been a lot of skepticism out there whether or not the state would exercise this option. Little Miami is a big district, 98 square miles. It's an excellent district. It would be so hard to divide up this district. We know how politically loaded this would be, emotional. I mean, you just name it. This is a nightmare scenario. However, it is in the law. There is a provision that does seem to address the situation, so we have to talk about it. So, if the state were not going to, well, let me back up. There's been a lot of mixed messages here because we've had people come to us and say they wouldn't vote to dissolve our district. No way. Why vote to dissolve our district when you've got crummy districts out there that are still allowed to run? This isn't about academic performance. This is about dollars and cents. That's all it is. It's money. So if they choose not to do it, and you don't want people to talk about it. So we've had people from the state tell us they're not interested in dissolving us, and we believe them. But whether they're interested in doing that or not appears to be irrelevant, really. We've heard, let me say that, we've heard that these same people from the ODE have told our neighboring districts, not going to happen, don't worry about it. On the other hand, I personally had a conversation with Mr. Roger Hardin from the ODE, who is kind of over this fiscal commission, and I asked him, and this was my question to him, what is going to happen to Little Miami if we do not pass a levy in 2011 and we run out of our loan capacity? We do not have money to operate. What is the answer to that question? And this was not in public, but this is what he said to me. We will revoke your charter and then we will figure it out. Okay, now I got a problem with the timeline on that one because we're in November now and we're going to run out of money before the school year's over and we haven't started planning. So that is why we're here today, folks. And if you don't believe me, I've got a little audio clip here. Sure, you said it. This is actually a gentleman, again, from the ODE. He is from the Office of Public Affairs. His name is Scott Blake. And he is not talking about Little Miami in this audio clip, but he is talking about another school district up around the Akron area. It's called Springfield Local. They are in fiscal emergency for the second time, and they are currently working their way out of it. So the setup for this audio clip is actually it came from October of 2009, and Springfield Local had a levy on the ballot. They were kind of in a position that we are, and I don't know if this is coincidental or not, but they're at 31% state funding for their revenues. So they're kind of in the same position at this point, and their superintendent had an interview, and he said that if they didn't pass the levy, they were going to have to shut their doors. They were getting close to the end of the line. So the reporter then talked to Mr. Scott Blake from the ODE, and this is his response.
So other than the levy, what can they do? And if the levy fails, is it true, according to the superintendent, that their only choice is to shut the doors?
certainly reductions that have been made, already in the district. If the levies don't pass, there would be examinations done as to whether or not there's.
So other than the levy, what can they do? And if the levy fails, is it true, according to the superintendent, that their only choice is to shut the door?
There are certainly reductions that have been made already in the district. If the levies don't pass, there would be examinations done as to whether or not there's anything, that could be further reduced. There is a provision in law that if a district is unable to meet the minimum operating standards that's been set forth by the state, that the State Board of Education can look at revoking their charter and moving students into other districts.
He kind of falls off at the end a little bit. But what he said was there is a provision in law to revoke the school's charter and move the children to neighboring school districts. And when this report came out, the reporter went on to say that where the kids go would be dependent in part on the ability of each district to service additional students. So even though this is not about Little Miami, it is about Little Miami. There is a provision in law that says this is a possibility, and we say we need to start talking about it. We would rather be prepared for what might happen, get a plan together, throw it away if we pass a levy, than to be in November scrambling. And actually, it's not going to be Little Miami that's scrambling, because our charter will be revoked. At that point, it will be the state of Ohio scrambling, and we think it would be better for our neighboring school districts to engage now to help formulate this plan that will work out to the best possible scenarios for each of them. And, of course, what will be the new students in their districts that were former Little Miami students. Rather prepare now than to wait until November or whenever the state decides they have to figure it out. So that's where we're coming from on this particular scenario. In terms of analyzing it, obviously there's a legal framework for it. There's no precedent for it, and unfortunately, it's that black hole. There are no procedures that address what the state is going to do. How are they going to tackle this problem? I think this is the upside, and again, this is an opportunity from here through the rest of the year for our neighboring districts to engage and help gather the information to establish the criteria of what makes sense if this should occur. I think a lot of people were expecting us to come with a big map with new lines drawn everywhere, and it's way, way too soon for that. There is so much information that each district has to provide. It's financial, it's geographical, it's capacities of the buildings. There's so much that needs to be brought to the table, and before you even start to draw any lines. We need good, solid reasons for what criteria needs to be in place before those decisions could be made, or they're going to be bad decisions. And again, that's why we would encourage our neighboring districts to think about it now. It's going to impact them if this were to happen. It's going to impact their citizens, their students, their financial bottom line, as much as it's going to impact our students. So why are we here today? I mean, if we're dissolved, if we're gone, somebody's going to take care of it. I have no doubt that the students in Little Miami are going to be educated somewhere because the state has to make sure that happens. But if they're making hasty decisions, I just think it's not going to end well for anybody, not us, not the neighboring districts. There are going to be a lot of unhappy people if we wait till the last minute to start talking about this. And again, our timeline showing the same two opportunities for levies. And in this case, we're showing the red area where we are running out of money and we don't have a levy passed. And then beyond that, sometime in 2012, if dissolution would occur, hopefully, eventually, things would get worked out. and our kids would be taken care of as well as the neighboring district's children. When people don't believe that this is a possibility, one of the things they say is, you know, it'd just be easier to change the law. And it might be. It might be. And in fact, there is a law about changing the law. So we're going to talk about this law too. And I'm not going to read all this one, but I'm going to show you the important parts of it. Basically, this is talking about what some of the responsibilities of the state commission, the oversight commission, has. And so one of the things they have to do is every year that a school district is in fiscal emergency, they have to make a report to the General Assembly, the President of the Senate and the House of Representatives. I don't know if this is on paper or if they do this in person, but on or before the 1st of April, they make a report. And they're basically talking about how the district's doing, what the projections, that we're starting to meet the requirements that will get us out of fiscal emergency. And they can make recommendations for further actions, including, and this is the important part, including any legislative action needed to make provisions of law more effective for their purposes, that's getting us out of fiscal emergency, or to, this is the part I really like, to enhance revenue raising or financing capabilities of the school district. I love that, because what it says is that this commission, this oversight commission, can go to our legislature and say, I've got a great idea that's going to help this district. And all you need to do is change a law. So what might some of those laws be? Well, this is where it gets kind of dicey. Is it going to be a Band-Aid law? What could that possibly be? Maybe these are some of the ideas that have been bandied about. We could extend our repayment of the loan. Instead of 2 years, make it 10. How about if you somehow change the law so it's not maxed out when we reach our loan capacity? You know, you extend that, you raise that level. Does that help Little Miami if we do those? You know, does it help address our educational problems? I'm not sure about that. What are some other possibilities? Raise the floor. That's getting a little bit harder to do. A little bit harder to raise the floor. Or, if you're really dreaming big, you could say to the state legislature, you know how you can fix this problem for Little Miami? And not just Little Miami, but every school district in the state of Ohio. You could change the law to fix this funding problem once and for all, and all of these problems go away.
Hallelujah. Now, what is that?
So, now the problems with this scenario. There's no track record for it. As far as we know, there has not been any law changes to accommodate schools in fiscal emergency because they've all managed to crawl out of it before they ran out of loan capacity. So we don't know how long that would take, but if you watch how long things take in the state legislature, chances are it's not going to happen in time to help Little Miami. Again, this law would have to be suggested, voted upon, enacted, and in effect this year in order to help Little Miami before it's too late. So even those Band-Aid laws, I mean, you might get enough people to agree on a Band-Aid law, but I'm not sure that that actually doesn't end up being a nightmare for Little Miami. Does it restore any educational programming? Does it, importantly, remember one of the things the State Commission has to do is that they have to remove the conditions that got us here to begin with. So if you put a Band-Aid law on it, if you raise that loan capacity or you stretch it out so it takes us 10 years to pay back, does that eliminate the conditions that got us here in the first place? Not at all. So, I mean, it's not like the legislature always follows the law because we still do have this school funding issue, but that would definitely not be aligned with what the law says we have to do to get out of fiscal emergency. So aside from how you regard that, how you interpret that law and how you see that playing out, on the timeline, whatever happens in terms of trying to change state law, we definitely have, we have crunch time. You see the arrow pointing up into April. That's the, that's the point that they would make their report. Again, the 2 levy opportunities and us running out of money before or after they change the law. And finally, the last scenario that I'm going over with you is transfer of property. We do not think that this is a real possibility, but we want to include it for the sake of completeness. There is another law that says that the state board may propose transfer of districts. And this does have some this does have precedent. School districts have transferred property from one to another. As a matter of fact, it seems like yesterday, but it was probably 10 years ago, we transferred property, basically swapped property with King's Local. It was the area around the golf course. It was a convenient thing to do for both districts, and most importantly, it was a good thing to do for the kids who were ending up straddling 2 districts, and in fact, King's had their new school built in the Little Miami School District. It was an odd situation. We took care of it. It was a good thing to do. So there is precedent for this. Districts do have property transfers. However, this has been discussed at the state board level, and the state superintendent has sent a letter to her board talking about this because they've been getting letters and phone calls in regard to Little Miami and the concern about our district and possible dissolution. And for some reason, when the subject of dissolution arises, it seems like representatives of the state start talking about transfer of property, which is not at all what we've been talking about. We've been talking about the dissolution clause that we showed you earlier, but I don't know if this is an attempt to change the subject or what, but we wanted to talk about it. So anyway, the state superintendent sent a letter to her board, and in that letter she said that, did I miss it? It's on the bottom? Okay, but the timeline is longer than we have. Again, it comes down to crunch time for us. So Deb Delisle is the state superintendent, and this is what she wrote. Based on past experiences, this type of legal action generally takes 1 calendar year or more, with the majority of necessary studies and a substantial plan developed by local communities. So what she's saying is it takes a long time, and in fact, if they were considering doing that, they would have to get started now. And as I shared with you earlier, they're not willing to look at that until we've exhausted all of our levy possibilities, and it will definitely be too late at that point. And again, here's the timeline with the 2 levy possibilities. In November, if the second levy opportunity, if that fails, then that's when the state kicks in and says, okay, what are we going to do here? Too late for property transfer. And finally, this is just a compressed timeline with all the various scenarios that I just shared with you. And I will remind you that the red is not the good one. So it shows that there are 2 real possibilities for what might happen in the future, whether you like them or not. The best one is number 2, and that is something more than the 13.95 mil levy. The second one would be the dissolution. And the first one up there is the one that the state board has asked us to do, and again, that has the question mark associated with it. The other 2 is just not going to work out time-wise. So, back to the agenda. We are moving along, and we're not going to keep you here too much longer. Key action steps for what we would like to see happen in the next year or so. Mrs. Dunbar is going to come back and finish up for us.